Imagine for a second, just put yourself there. You are standing in this damp, freezing, muddy field in northern France.
Sounds miserable already.
Right. You are totally exhausted. And you're holding this heavy wooden pole made of ash that is over 26 feet long.
Which is just an insane piece of equipment to hold in a field.
Like completely.
Yeah.
But you're not alone. You are surrounded by more than 8,000 of your brothers in arms, packed so tightly together that you can barely even draw a full breath.
Just a massive wall of humanity.
Exactly. And you are a member of the most elite, terrifying, undisputed military force on the entire planet. Like, you are the masters of the world.
You're untouchable. Or at least you think you are.
Yeah, because here's the crazy part. Over the next few hours, you and almost everyone standing around you are going to be systematically slaughtered, and your entire century-long military dynasty just erased from the earth.
It's just a complete and total wipeout.
And the most haunting part of all of this, the final blow, isn't even some brilliant tactical masterstroke by the enemy. It's going to happen because of a single, chaotic, misheard command.
Yeah, it's the absolute definition of a paradigm shift. And paradigm shifts, they are rarely clean. I mean, usually they're terrifyingly violent.
They're messy.
Incredibly messy, because when the old world meets the new world, the old world doesn't just, quietly pack up its bags and leave.
Wait, it doesn't just retire.
No, it fights. It fights until it is completely destroyed.
Well, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, our mission is to take you back to a very specific, incredibly consequential day, May 19th, 1643.
A date that really changed everything for Europe.
It really did.
Yeah.
So we are unpacking this phenomenal, deeply researched battlefield study by Michael Prichter. And we've got to give a shout out to battlefieldtravels.com for this one. We are exploring the Battle of Rocroi. And just a quick note before we really get into the weeds here. Since we are talking about a location in the French Ardennes, the name is spelled R-O-C-R-O-I, but it's actually pronounced Rocroi.
Yeah, that's a really crucial distinction, especially if you, as a listener, if you ever find yourself walking that actual terrain today.
Which we are definitely going to talk about later, because that is a whole thing.
Yeah, you just want to make sure you're asking the locals for the right town. Otherwise, you're going to get some very confused looks.
Absolutely. So I want to set the stakes for you here, because they are just almost unimaginable. We are looking at a literal superpower clash right in the middle of the 30 Years' War.
The big leagues of the 17th century.
Exactly. So on one side, we have this French army, about 24,000 troops, and they're commanded by this 21-year-old prodigy, Louis II, the Duke of Enghien.
21 years old. I mean, just think about that for a second.
I can barely wrap my head around it. And then on the other side, you have a massive Spanish army of 27,000 men under General Francisco de Melo.
Yeah.
But from reading Prichter's study, I really get the sense that this isn't just a story about two big armies running into each other in the woods.
Oh, not at all. No, what makes Prichter's study so compelling is that he frames this as, well, a profound collision of systems.
Like two different worlds colliding.
Precisely. You have the Spanish Tercio, which had been the undisputed juggernaut of European battlefields for an entire century at this point.
Right.
And it is coming face to face with the agile, innovative technology of French linear formations. This battle is like the ultimate case study in what happens when a stagnant traditional monolith meets a flexible, modernized disruptor.
Right. But I want to stop you right there. Because when we talk about history, it is so easy to just casually toss around phrases like, the 30 Years' War or a superpower clash.
Sure, it gets abstracted.
Exactly. Yeah. And if I'm being totally honest, before reading this source material, my understanding of the 30 Years' War was basically just a bunch of guys in puffy shirts fought over religion for 3 decades.
Yeah, that's the standard textbook summary, unfortunately.
Right. So how did these two massive, world-ending war machines end up fighting over a tiny fortress in the French woods in the first place?
Well, to understand the chessboard, we have to look at the wider conflict. So the 30 Years' War ran from 1618 to 1648.
A long time to be fighting.
A very long time. And it is arguably one of the most complex, convoluted, and just devastating conflicts in human history. To put it in perspective, proportional to the population, the casualties in some parts of Europe during this war were actually higher than in World War II.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah, the devastation was just absolute. Entire regions were depopulated.
That is staggering. And according to the source material, this massive bloodbath didn't even start as a great power clash, right? It started as like a localized religious conflict.
Yeah, precisely. It ignited as an internal struggle within the Holy Roman Empire. Now, as the old joke goes, the Holy Roman Empire was neither holy nor Roman nor an empire.
Right, I've heard that one.
Yeah, it was essentially this massive, fragmented kaleidoscope of small principalities, dukedoms, city-states, largely located in what we now call Germany.
Okay.
And you had Catholic factions who were backed heavily by the Habsburg dynasty, which, remember, ruled both Austria and Spain at the time.
Right, the big powerhouse family.
Exactly. And they were fighting to suppress the growing Protestant presence that had just exploded following the Reformation.
Okay, so at its core, it's Catholic versus Protestant,
Yeah.
tearing the German-speaking world apart. I get that. But, I mean, conflicts of that magnitude, they don't stay contained, do they?
They never do. No, a conflict of that size creates a geopolitical vortex. It creates massive instability. And in international relations, well, instability creates opportunity.
Everybody wants a piece of the pie.
Exactly. Soon, external powers began looking at the chaos in Germany and thinking, how can we use this absolute nightmare to our own advantage? The Danes intervened first in 1625.
Okay.
And then the Swedes, who, under their brilliant King Gustavus Adolphus, were a terrifyingly modern military power at the time they invaded Germany in 1630 to champion the Protestant cause.
Okay, so you've got this massive continent-spanning religious war. You have Catholics supporting Catholics and Protestants supporting Protestants. Makes sense.
Right.
But here's the part of Prichter's research where my brain kind of just broke.
Mm-hmm.
Because France looks at this entire situation and basically decides to throw the religious rulebook completely out the window.
They do. They really do. And what you were seeing in that moment is a pivotal turning point in global diplomacy.
Wait, hold on. I want to make sure the listener really grasps the contradiction here.
Mm-hmm.
Because France, under King Louis XIII, is a staunchly violently Catholic country.
Very much so.
I mean, they have their own internal issues with Protestants. You would fully expect them to side with the Catholic Habsburgs in Austria and Spain to, crush the Protestant Swedes.
That would be the logical assumption if religion was the only factor.
But according to the study, from about 1630 onwards, Catholic France actually begins secretly and then openly subsidizing the Protestant Swedish armies.
Yes.
They are literally paying Protestants to kill Catholics. Wouldn't the Pope excommunicate him for that? I mean, it sounds exactly like modern proxy warfare.
Oh, it is the absolute birth of modern proxy warfare. Without a doubt, what you are witnessing is the birth of raison d'etat, the national interest.
The national interest.
Right. The man driving this policy for France was Cardinal Richelieu, the king's chief minister. And for Richelieu and King Louis XIII, the great power rivalry with Spain was, frankly, infinitely more important than the internal religious conflicts happening over in Germany.
That is just wild pragmatism, especially for a cardinal.
Oh, Richelieu was a pragmatist above all else.
So why were they so terrified of Spain? What was the threat level there?
Well, because Spain was the dominant global superpower. If you look at a map of Europe from that era, the Spanish Habsburgs controlled the Iberian Peninsula to the south.
Yeah.
The Austrian Habsburgs controlled the Holy Roman Empire to the east. And crucially, Spain controlled the Spanish Netherlands.
Which is where exactly?
That's roughly modern-day Belgium and Luxembourg, which meant Spain was sitting right on France's northern border.
Oh, wow. So France is literally surrounded. They look at the map and see an unbroken ring of Habsburgs.
A geopolitical noose.
They feel completely boxed in. So religion doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
National survival matters.
Yeah.
Pragmatism completely overthrows ideology.
Exactly. They laid the groundwork for modern nation-state politics as we understand it today. You ally with whoever you need to ally with to weaken your primary geopolitical rival.
Even if it's a completely different religion.
If that means a Catholic cardinal funds a Protestant king to fight a Catholic emperor, so be it. And this geopolitical strangulation, this fear of the Spanish Netherlands, is what brings us directly to the fortress of Rocroi.
Yes, because fast forward to November 2024, Michael Prichter actually traveled to the French Ardennes to walk this exact ground.
Fieldwork is so important for these studies.
It really is. And his description of this fortress is just fascinating. He actually stayed in the old Spanish officers' quarters inside the town.
Which is a remarkable testament to the enduring nature of military architecture from that period. It's still standing.
Yeah, he writes that it's a fully functional little town today, but it is entirely enclosed within late 16th and early 17th century military defenses.
Which is just so rare to see intact.
Right. The fortress was built between 1550 and 1590, specifically to defend the French frontier against that exact threat from the Spanish Netherlands we just talked about.
The northern threat.
Yep. And later on, it was upgraded by Sebastian Vauban. Now, the study mentions Vauban was a master fortress designer. But what makes his design so special? Like, what is a star fort?
So Vauban was essentially the architectural genius of the 17th century. Before this era, castles just had high, flat stone walls.
Like the classic medieval castles you see in movies.
Exactly. But as cannons became more powerful, a flat stone wall became a huge liability. A cannonball would just hit it flat and shatter the masonry.
That makes sense.
So military engineers developed the star fort, or the trace Italien.
Because it looks like a giant star from above.
Precisely. Instead of flat walls, you have low, thick, angled earthen banks faced with stone, and they jut out in these sharp triangular points called bastions.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
But the real genius isn't just the height or the materials, it's the geometry. The angles were mathematically calculated so that there were absolutely no blind spots.
Not the blind spots at all.
None. If an attacking army tried to assault one of the points of the star, the defenders on the adjacent points could fire directly into the attacker's flanks.
Oh, wow.
It created these overlapping, interlocking fields of fire. It made traditional sieges an absolute mathematical nightmare. You couldn't just walk up to a wall anymore.
So it's basically a gigantic geographical kill box.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
And the fact that the town is still there, largely preserved inside those bastions, allowed someone like Prichter to literally step back in time. He used historical accounts, period sketches, and modern GIS, Geographic Information System analysis, to truly understand the spatial reality of the battlefield.
Because it's one thing to read about a battle in a book. It's another to stand on the walls and actually see the sightlines. It brings the history into the physical world.
And to really understand what was about to happen on the plains just south of that fortress, we need to dive into the mud. We have to look closely at the weapons, the psychology, and the tactics these two massive armies brought with them.
It's essential.
Because, as you mentioned earlier, this wasn't just a clash of soldiers. It was a clash of two totally different military philosophies.
It really was. You cannot fully comprehend the Battle of Rocroi without understanding the anatomy of these two distinct military juggernauts, the Spanish Tercio and the French linear formations.
Okay, I want to spend some real time on this because I need to understand this Tercio thing. The undisputed champions of Europe for a solid century.
They were the boogeymen of the era.
When I was reading Prichter's breakdown of this, the only analogy my brain could come up with was to think of the Tercio as this massive, heavily armored, slow-moving battleship. Like, it was designed for an older era, but it was so dense and powerful that it just steamrolled everything in its path.
Yeah, that's a vivid image. But, well, we should debate that analogy
Not
just
quite.
slightly.
Okay, lay it on me.
Calling it a battleship implies it was kind of obsolete from the start. But in 1643, that battleship had never truly been sunk in a decisive field battle.
Oh, so it was still undefeated.
Basically, yes, it was sluggish, sure, but if it bumped into your army, you were dead. The Tercio was originally an incredible adaptation. Introduced back in the 1500s, it was Spain's answer to integrating new, unreliable gunpowder weapons with traditional, reliable melee defenses.
Right, because before this, armies were mostly guys swinging swords or heavy cavalry just charging at each other.
Exactly. As gunpowder became a factor, the Spanish created a system that combined the defensive stopping power of the pike with the offensive range power of the firearm.
But the sheer scale of these formations, I'm just trying to picture this in my head. We're talking about massive, dense blocks of humanity.
Huge blocks.
According to the study, a standard tercio could be formed with a frontage of 70 pikes wide and 20 ranks deep.
Think about the physical geometry of that for a second. That is 1,400 men, packed tightly together, shoulder to shoulder, chest to back, in a single, cohesive, rectangular block.
And the weapons they are carrying. Let's talk about the pike, because this blew my mind.
It's a beast of a weapon.
The pikemen in the center are holding pikes that are 8 meters long. Let's just pause on that. 8 meters, that's over 26 feet.
It is massive.
You are a soldier walking through a muddy field holding a wooden pole the length of a yellow school bus. How is that even physically possible?
Well, it requires immense physical strength and, more importantly, unimaginable discipline. An 8-meter ash pole is incredibly heavy, and the leverage of it means the tip is constantly sagging and bouncing as you move.
Right, it's not perfectly rigid.
Exactly. You have to lock it in tight against your body. Now imagine doing that while marching in a block of 1,400 men over uneven terrain, through the mud, while people are actively shooting at you.
That sounds like a nightmare. What happens if the guy in front of you trips?
It causes a catastrophic domino effect.
Oh, no.
Yeah, if one man falls, the men behind him stumble, the pikes get tangled up, gaps open up in the formation, and the entire integrity of the block is compromised.
Which is exactly what you don't want.
Exactly. This is why the tercio system relied entirely on highly trained, veteran, professional soldiers. You couldn't just, hand a pitchfork to a peasant and put him in a tercio. It took years to learn how to move as a single, multi-thousand-legged organism.
Wow. Okay, so you have this core block of pikes, essentially a walking, bristling forest of spears, and then around them you have the firearms.
The sleeves, they called them.
Right. The source material mentions musketeers deployed across the front and arquebusiers deployed on the flanks. I want to clarify the difference here because it feels crucial to understanding the physical toll on the soldier. Let's start with the musketeers.
Well, the musket of the early 17th century was a terrifying weapon, but it was an absolute beast to operate. These were heavy, large-bore, matchlock firearms.
Prichter notes that these guns were so long and so heavy they actually required a physical rest, like a wooden monopod or a forked stick, just to hold the barrel up so the soldier could aim.
Yes, exactly. You physically could not hold it steady from the shoulder. It was too heavy.
That's crazy.
These were designed as armor-piercing weapons. They fired a massive lead ball intended to drop a heavily armored cavalryman like a man and his horse at a significant range.
So it's basically a hand cannon.
Pretty much. But because the gun was so cumbersome, and because the matchlock firing mechanism required managing a literal burning piece of slow match cord, the rate of fire was agonizingly slow.
I can imagine. You're fumbling with a burning rope while someone is trying to stab you.
Right. It took dozens of intricate steps just to reload one single shot.
Okay, so heavy, slow, armor-piercing cannons on sticks in the front. And then on the flanks, you have the arquebusiers.
Right. The arquebus was essentially a lighter, earlier version of the musket.
Okay.
It didn't require rest. It had a shorter range and less stopping power, but a slightly faster rate of fire. They were used for closer-in defense and skirmishing on the edges of the formation.
So if I'm picturing this correctly, it's a giant block of spears sleeved in a layer of guys with heavy guns.
That's the visual, yes.
But the defining feature of the tercio, the reason I called it a battleship earlier, was its defensive mechanism. Prichter describes what happened when they were threatened by cavalry. If enemy horses charged, the shooters on the outside didn't just stand there and die.
Oh, no. That would be a waste of highly trained men.
Right. They would physically fall back, retreating directly into the dense block of pikemen. They would seek protection inside the human fortress.
And you have to analyze this from the perspective of a soldier within those ranks. If you are a Spanish pikeman standing in the center of a tercio, you are packed into a deeply claustrophobic environment.
I'm getting stressed just thinking about it.
You are surrounded by the smell of sweat, wet wool, and the sulfurous stench of black powder. You can't see anything beyond the helmets of the men directly in front of you. But against a cavalry charge, you feel incredibly safe.
Because of the pikes.
Exactly. No horse, no matter how well trained or spurred on by its rider, is going to willingly throw itself into a solid 26-foot deep wall of sharp steel points. It just won't do it.
It's the ultimate defensive porcupine. If you charge it, you die.
Precisely. However, sitting still in a giant block presents a massive fatal flaw.
Artillery, right.
Yes. As artillery became more prevalent, more mobile, and more accurate, the tercio became highly vulnerable. Think about it. You are a massive, slow-moving, unmissable target.
You can't exactly dodge a cannonball when you're packed in with 1,400 other guys.
Exactly. An enemy cannonball fired into a block of men 20 ranks deep doesn't just kill one person. It hits the front rank and then relies on sheer kinetic energy to tear through the entire formation, taking out dozens of men, shattering legs and chests with a single bouncing shot.
Oh, it's just horrific, man. Did no one look at this and think, hey, we're sitting ducks here, we need to spread out?
Oh, they did. And ironically, the people who perfected the solution weren't the French, it was the Swedes, under King Gustavus Adolphus, whom we mentioned earlier.
The Protestant champion.
Right. And the Dutch and the French subsequently adopted and refined that Swedish model.
Okay, so if the Spanish tercio is the slow-moving battleship, the French linear formation is like a swarm of modern agile destroyers. How did this linear system actually work? Like, how do you generate more firepower without just getting run over by horses?
Well, Gustavus Adolphus realized that the dense blocks of the Tercio were essentially wasting human capital.
How so?
If you have a block of men 20 ranks deep, only the men in the first 2 or 3 ranks can actually use their weapons effectively. The other 17 ranks are just standing there, essentially waiting in line to get shot by enemy artillery.
Right. They are literal cannon fodder. They aren't contributing anything to the fight at that moment.
Exactly. So the reformers drastically thinned out the lines. Instead of one massive block 20 lengths deep, they organized the army into alternating, shallower groups of musketeers and pikemen, usually only about 6 ranks deep.
6 ranks instead of 20. That's a huge difference.
And they significantly increased the proportion of firearms to pikes. They also integrated light, highly mobile field artillery directly into the infantry lines, rather than just leaving all the cannons in one static battery in the back.
Okay, but I have a question here. If the lines are only 6 ranks deep, how do they keep up a constant rate of fire? Because you just said it takes dozens of steps to reload a matchlock musket.
This is where the tactical genius of the linear formation really comes in. They utilized a system called volley fire and the countermarch.
Volley fire and the countermarch. Break that down for me.
Okay, so the first rank of musketeers steps forward, levels their weapons, and fires a devastating synchronized volley all at once.
Boom, boom.
Then, instead of standing there in the front to reload, they physically turn and march through the gaps in the ranks behind them to the very back of the formation to begin reloading.
Oh, I see.
And as they move back, the second rank steps forward, fires, and moves to the back, and so on.
Oh, wow. So it's a continuous, rotating conveyor belt of gunfire.
That's exactly it. By the time the 6th rank has fired and moved back, the 1st rank has finished reloading and is ready to step forward and fire again.
That is brilliant.
It requires immense drill and discipline, but it changes the entire mathematics of warfare. Let's just do the math real quick.
Okay.
Let's say you have 3,000 men. If you form them into traditional tercios, you have a very narrow frontage facing the enemy with incredibly limited firepower because most of your men are buried inside the block.
Right, standing around.
But if you take those exact same 3,000 men and deploy them in linear formations, you stretch your line out horizontally. You bring significantly more muskets and cannons to bear on the enemy simultaneously.
You are generating far more firepower and a much wider frontage with the exact same number of troops. You are literally outshooting them.
Exactly.
But wait, what happens when cavalry charges this thin line? They don't have the mass of the tercio to protect them.
Well, because the formations were shallower and much more maneuverable, the musketeers could quickly fall back behind their own integrated pikemen when threatened. It wasn't as totally impregnable as the tercio, but it was flexible.
Trade-off.
Yeah, it traded absolute defense for overwhelming offense and agility.
Okay, so we have the unstoppable, agile force of French firepower meeting the immovable, armored object of Spanish discipline. How did these two completely different philosophies actually crash into each other? Let's set the scene for May 1643.
Right, so General Francisco de Melo and his massive Spanish force of 27,000 men had crossed down from the Spanish Netherlands and laid siege to the fortress of Rocroi.
Okay, they're at the fort.
And the French garrison trapped inside the fort was tiny, only about 1,500 men. De Melo wasn't particularly worried about the garrison itself. He actually set up his siege works primarily on the flat plain to the south of the fortress.
Why to the south?
Specifically to block any French relief army from marching up to their aid. He wanted to intercept them.
And from reading Prichter's geographic breakdown, access to this plain from the southwest was an absolute nightmare for the French. To get to the battlefield, you had to march through the dense forest of potés.
A very tricky approach.
Yeah, it's a natural choke point. De Melo is an experienced general. He looks at the map, he sees the forest, and he does the logical thing. He deploys a force of scouts and light troops directly into the woods.
His objective there was standard military doctrine. You put eyes in the forest to report on any French progress, and ideally, you set up an ambush to harass the French vanguard while they are strung out in a vulnerable, narrow marching column on these tiny forest roads.
It was a very sound tactical plan, so what went wrong? Why didn't it work?
Well, warfare is highly dependent on execution, not just planning. In the early hours of May 19th, the French vanguard pushing through the forest violently encountered the Spanish scouts. And rather than being ambushed and delayed,
They turned the tables.
they do. The French troops rapidly and completely overwhelmed the Spanish.
The Spanish scouts were essentially wiped out. And the consequence of this is massive, right? because the Spanish command back on the plain is sitting there waiting for a report, and they have absolutely no idea what is happening in the woods.
It is a catastrophic intelligence failure.
A total blackout.
Because the scouts were eliminated, the entire French army of 24,000 men under the young Duke of Enghien is able to march entirely out of the forest and deploy onto the plain totally unopposed by the main Spanish force.
Imagine being General de Melo. You think the enemy is days away, or at least hopelessly bogged down in the trees, and suddenly you look to your south and an army of 24,000 men is just calmly lining up on your doorstep.
It's a nightmare scenario. The Spanish had an opportunity to catch the French in their most vulnerable state, marching in a column, but instead they're forced into this chaotic scramble.
I had to totally pivot.
They have to rapidly reorient their entire massive army. They have to pull troops out of the siege trenches and form up a battle line facing south to meet a fully deployed enemy.
But both sides do eventually form up. They use the standard 17th century deployment. Cavalry is positioned out on both wings, the heavy infantry is packed into the center, and the artillery is pushed forward.
A very classic setup.
But the young French commander, the Duke of Enghien, he knows he is standing on a ticking clock, doesn't he?
Yes, time is the one resource the French absolutely do not have.
Why is that?
Because de Melo is waiting for reinforcements. Another 4,000 veteran troops under General Johann Beck are marching hard toward the battlefield. If Beck arrives, the numerical advantage for the Spanish goes from a slight edge to absolutely overwhelming.
Okay. So the French are basically on a timer.
Exactly. De Melo looks at the tactical situation and realizes he cannot fight a slow, grinding battle of attrition. He has to force the issue and break the Spanish army before those reinforcements appear over the horizon.
So he strikes fast. The battle opens, as so many battles of this era do, with a massive, thundering cavalry action on both flanks. And initially, it doesn't look good for the French.
No, it's a rocky start.
On the French left wing, their cavalry, under General Henri de la Ferte-Sanitaire, charges out, but they are brutally driven back by the Spanish allied German cavalry.
Under Count Ernst von Eisenberg, yeah. The French left is actively collapsing. This is a critical, highly dangerous moment.
Because if the left falls, the center is exposed.
Right. If the German cavalry pursues the fleeing French horsemen, clears that flank, and then wheels inward to attack the side of the French infantry lines, the battle is over before it really begins. The French linear formations were highly vulnerable to flanking maneuvers because they were so thin.
But over on the French right wing, it is a completely different story, and this is where things get truly wild. Jean de Gassion and the Duke of Enghien himself are personally leading the French cuirassiers. Now, let's explain what a cuirassier is, because we aren't just talking about guys in cloth coats on light horses.
No. Think of cuirassiers as the armored tanks of the 17th century.
Armored tanks. I love that.
They are heavy cavalrymen. They are wearing heavy iron breastplates, cuirasses, hence the name, and heavy iron helmets.
So they're well protected.
Very. They carry pistols for initial shock value and heavy straight swords for brutal close-quarters melee. And they ride large, powerful war horses directly into the enemy ranks.
So this armored fist of French cuirassiers slams into the Wallonian cavalry that is anchoring the Spanish left flank.
And they meet with spectacular, immediate success. The momentum and sheer violence of the charge don't just push the Wallonians back.
They can break them.
They completely shatter their cohesion and drive them entirely off the field.
But the French don't stop there.
What?
This is the part of Brichter's account that I literally had to read twice to believe.
Yeah.
Once the Wallonian cavalry is gone, Gassion and d'Enghien look up and see the weak second echelon Spanish infantry holding that side of the line.
Right. The second echelon troops are the reserve, often less experienced or allied forces, not the elite Spanish veterans.
So the French heavy cavalry crashes straight through them. The line shatters. And now I want you, the listener, to try and visualize the sheer audacity of what happens next.
It's amazing.
The French heavy cavalry doesn't just reform. They don't just turn and attack the Spanish center like you'd expect. They literally keep riding. They ride entirely around the rear of the massive Spanish army.
It is a breathtaking, almost unbelievable maneuver. They circumnavigate the entire battlefield.
They ride all the way behind the Spanish lines, behind their baggage train, until they arrive behind the German cavalry on the other side of the battlefield. The exact same German cavalry that had just beaten the French left wing and was thinking about flanking the French infantry. And d'Enghien smashes into their rear.
Let's slow down here because this moment perfectly highlights the fatal flaw of the entire Spanish system we were talking about earlier.
The battleship flaw.
Exactly. We talked about the tercios being a massive battleship. They were magnificent at holding ground and repelling direct frontal assaults, but they were entirely too slow, too rigid, and too cumbersome to react to rapid, sweeping maneuvers happening on the periphery of the battlefield.
They just couldn't turn fast enough.
The Spanish command structure literally could not pivot their troops around fast enough.
The physics of their communication loop was broken by the speed of the horses.
Exactly. The French cavalry moved faster than the Spanish command could process the changing reality of the map. To turn a tercio of 1,400 men to face a totally new threat to the rear requires immense coordination, shouting of orders, and time. And by the time they realized the French cavalry was behind them, the French were already attacking someone else.
The psychological shock must have been immense. I mean, put yourself in the boots of a German cavalryman on the Spanish right wing. You think you're winning. You've pushed the French left wing back. You are preparing to deliver the killing blow to the enemy infantry.
You're feeling good about the day.
Right. And suddenly, thousands of tons of armored French horses and screaming men crash directly into your back. It causes an absolute contagious collapse. Spain's allies, the Italian infantry, the German cavalry, the weaker Burgundian forces stationed on the flanks, they panic.
Total panic. Discipline evaporates. They break and flee the battlefield in sheer terror.
The entire periphery of the Spanish army has been stripped away. The wings are gone. The cavalry is routed or dead. And as the dust settles, what you are left with is this haunting, truly cinematic image. The elite Spanish corps is now totally isolated in the dead center of the plain.
The Allies have fled, but the Spanish veterans do not run. They are the undisputed masters of Europe, and they are not about to flee from a French army they consider culturally and militarily inferior.
What remains standing in the mud are just 4 elite Spanish tercios and 1 veteran Burgundian tercio. In total, about 8,000 troops left out of the original 27,000.
A fraction of their strength.
And the man commanding this infantry is the Count of Fontaine. I just have to pause on this detail from Prichter's study because it sounds like something out of a George R.R. Martin fantasy novel.
It really does. It's an incredible detail.
The Count of Fontaine is crippled with gout. He literally cannot walk or ride a horse. So he is commanding the most elite infantry in the world from a literal wooden sedan chair being physically carried around the battlefield by his men.
It is an incredibly striking image. I mean, the dedication required from his men to carry him through a battle under fire is immense. And despite his physical limitations, Fontaine is a brilliant, cold-blooded tactician.
He knows what he's doing.
He absolutely does. He sees that his flanks are completely gone. He sees the French cavalry reforming in his rear. He sees the French linear formations advancing from the front. He knows exactly what the French intend to do. He is surrounded.
So what does he do?
He executes the only maneuver that can possibly save his men. He orders the remaining tercios to consolidate. They merge into a single, massive, all-around defensive pike square.
A mega tercio.
Basically, a fortress of flesh and wood, bristling with 26-foot pikes in absolutely every direction.
Let's try to put ourselves in the boots of a Spanish soldier in that final square. Your allies have vanished into the woods. You are completely surrounded by 24,000 victorious French soldiers. You are packed so tightly you can barely breathe. You are bracing your pike.
Knowing what's coming.
Right. And the French, they don't even need to charge you. They just bring up their artillery and they line up their modern linear formations of musketeers and they just start pouring volley after volley of fire into your densely packed ranks.
It is a horrific mechanical reality. The French are utilizing the exact advantage their linear system was designed for. They have a wider frontage, they surround the square, they generate massive coordinated firepower, and the Spanish square is a target that is, frankly, mathematically impossible to miss.
You point and shoot.
Every cannonball that strikes the square tears a bloody path through 20 men. Every musket volley drops soldiers who cannot shoot back because they are buried deep inside the formation.
And just to crush any lingering hope, the French cavalry swings around and attacks the Spanish baggage train in the rear.
Taking all the supplies.
Yep. That means all the extra supplies, all the potential escape routes, any hope of relief from Beck's reinforcements, completely severed.
Yet, despite being subjected to this withering, systematic destruction, the Spanish initially refuse all offers to surrender. The French, who were frankly awed by the sheer stoicism and insane courage of these veterans, they actually stop firing. They send envoys forward to offer them terms. They are giving them an honorable way out.
Which is wild in the middle of a battle like this.
Right, but the Spanish officers discuss it standing among their dead, and they decline.
Why? I mean, logically, you are surrounded, you are being bombarded, you cannot win. Why not just surrender and live?
Because for them, this is about way more than just surviving the day. It's about the honor of the Tercio. They are defending a 100-year-old legacy of invincibility.
Wow.
To surrender to the French, a power they viewed as upstarts, would be a public admission that their era was over. They would rather die standing in the mud than live on their knees in disgrace.
It's fascinating how deeply ingrained military culture becomes. The tactical system is completely obsolete, it is failing them in real time. But their psychological commitment to that system remains absolute. They're choosing to be martyrs for a paradigm that simply no longer works.
It is the ultimate tragic consequence of systemic stagnation.
So the French envoys return, and the slaughter resumes. Until we reach 9:30 hours. By 9:30 in the morning, the situation inside the square has gone from desperate to just apocalyptic.
It's a bloodbath.
The Spanish ranks are completely decimated. More importantly, their ammunition is exhausted. The musketeers and arquebusiers have fired every last scrap of lead and powder, and the Count of Fontaine is dead. He was shot and killed while sitting in his sedan chair.
A terrible way to go.
Command has fallen to a subordinate Spanish colonel, and this colonel finally looks around, sees the thousands of dead, realizes that the honor of the Tercio has been thoroughly satisfied by their blood, and he signals a desire to negotiate.
He recognizes that the line between honor and total annihilation has finally been crossed. It is time to save whoever is left.
The Duke of Enghien sees the signal. He orders the artillery to cease fire. He and his command team ride forward out into the open space between the armies to formally accept the surrender of the greatest infantry force the world has ever known.
It should be a moment of profound historical solemnity, the passing of the torch.
But instead, it becomes an absolute nightmare.
The fog of war is absolute here. The Spanish colonel has signaled his intent to surrender, but you have to remember the environment. In a massive square of 8,000 men amid the deafening ringing of ears from cannon fire, the thick, blinding smoke of black powder and the sheer chaos of trauma word has not reached everyone.
Not everybody knows what's happening.
Right. As d'Enghien approaches, a group of Spanish musketeers on one side of the square, who likely believe the French command group is riding up to demand their unconditional submission, or perhaps even launch a final decapitation strike against their surviving officers, they level their remaining weapons and open fire.
They don't know a truce has been called. They haven't heard the order. They just see the enemy commander riding directly toward them, and they take the shot.
And to the French, who had graciously offered terms, stopped their attack, and ridden out in good faith, this looks like the ultimate act of treachery. They believe the Spanish cynically faked a surrender simply to draw their beloved Duke into a lethal ambush.
The French troops are utterly outraged. All the awe and respect they had for the stoic Spanish just evaporates in an instant, replaced by pure murderous rage.
The gloves come off completely.
They attack the square with absolute, unrestrained fury. It is no longer a battle. It is an execution. The sheer violence of this final, desperate assault finally shatters the cohesion of the Tercio. The square breaks. The impenetrable wall of pikes falls apart as men are hacked to pieces, and the surviving Spanish soldiers, their formation shattered, are reduced to begging for quarter in the mud.
It is a devastating end. A negotiated surrender turned into a bloodbath entirely because of a localized communication failure. The Spanish tercios suffered a catastrophic defeat, both physically in terms of lives lost and symbolically in the eyes of the world.
So what happens the day after you destroy a myth?
Well, you count the cost, and the cost was staggering.
The numbers from Prichter's research are grim. The Spanish force suffered around 15,000 casualties.
That's well over half their army.
Think about that for a second. Out of 27,000 men who marched onto that plain, 8,000 were killed on the field, and 7,000 were taken prisoner. The French losses were estimated at only between 4,000 and 5,000.
The tactical victory was complete, but the strategic and historical impact was earth-shattering. The Battle of Rocroi definitively shattered the myth of Spanish invincibility. For a century, the assumption in every royal court in Europe was that if the Spanish tercios took the field, the Spanish would inevitably win. Now, that assumption was dead.
It's gone.
It marked the undeniable decline of Spain as Europe's premier military power, and it simultaneously launched France's rise to continental dominance under a new generation of brilliant, aggressive generals like d'Enghien.
It proved, once and for all, that the age of heavy, static infantry formations was dead. The era of the slow-moving battleship was over. The age of linear, firepower-based tactics, of agility and rapid maneuver had officially arrived.
It is important to note, as Prichter does in his study, that Rocroi didn't end Spanish power overnight. Spain continued to fight in the 30 Years' War and remained a major player. But the aura was gone. The paradigm had shifted. Everyone now knew that the tercio could be broken, and they knew exactly how to do it.
What I really love about Michael Prichter's battlefield study is that he doesn't just leave this story trapped in dusty history books. He grounds it in the physical space today.
Which brings it all to life.
Exactly. He writes extensively about walking the actual battlefield, which is mostly just quiet rural villages and rolling farm fields now. And there's this one anecdote he shares that just gave me absolute chills when I read it.
It is a wonderful, poignant moment of connection across centuries of time.
He's walking around the plain, taking photographs for his research, and this elderly French couple pulls their car over.
Yeah.
And Prichter, using his rudimentary French, tries to explain that he's exploring the Battle of Rocroi. And despite the immense language barrier, the couple gets incredibly excited.
They know exactly what he's talking about.
Right. They start pointing out toward a specific nearby field. And they use two words over and over, Espagnol and dernier, meaning Spanish and last. And as they're saying this, they are enthusiastically drawing large squares in the air with their hands.
Prichter realizes in that moment that they aren't pointing at a monument or a historical plaque. They are physically indicating the exact, unmarked farm field where the great Spanish tercio made its last stand, formed in that final, tragic square.
How wild is that? Nearly 400 years later, the local residents still vividly remember the exact spot where a foreign army died. They don't just know the history, they know the geometry of the history. They're drawing the shape of the doomed tercio in the air with their hands.
It speaks to the immense trauma and the cultural significance of the event. A battle of that magnitude, with that much loss of life, it leaves a psychic scar on the landscape. It becomes woven into the local DNA, passed down through generations of farmers who likely kept plowing up lead musket balls and iron buckles in their fields.
And if you listening to this want to see a visual representation of that scar, Prichter highly recommends checking out pop culture. Specifically, the 2006 Spanish film Alatriste, starring Viggo Mortensen.
Oh, yes. Mortensen plays Captain Diego Alatriste, a grizzled veteran of the Spanish Army fighting his way through the grueling campaigns of the 30 Years' War.
According to Prichter, the final scene of that movie vividly, agonizingly depicts this exact last stand at Rocroi. He calls it one of the best combat sequences ever filmed.
High praise.
And definitely the best cinematic depiction of the pike-and-shot combat of the mid-17th century. They don't glorify it. They actually show the claustrophobia of being trapped in the square, the immense weight of the pikes, the terror of the cavalry charges, and the horrific, bloody impact of the French artillery tearing through the dense ranks.
It's an excellent recommendation for anyone trying to truly visualize the brutal mechanics we've been discussing today. It bridges the gap between historical statistics and human reality.
So we have covered a massive amount of ground today.
We really have.
From the grand, cynical, strategic chessboard of the 30 Years' War, where Catholic France secretly funded Protestant armies just to tilt the global balance of power, to the terrifying claustrophobic reality of holding a 26-foot pike in a dense human fortress while cannonballs tear through the men next to you.
And we watched the young Duke of Enghien pull off a brilliantly audacious cavalry maneuver, breaking the rules of engagement by riding completely around the enemy.
Right. And we witnessed the tragic, bloody last stand of the Spanish Tercio, marking the violent end of a 100-year military dynasty.
We have tracked the definitive shift from the rigid, armored power of the past to the flexible, volatile firepower of the future.
But before we wrap up, I want to ask a question, because this entire story leaves me with a thought that is, frankly, a little unsettling. And it ties right back into the very end of the battle.
You are thinking about the moment at 0930 hours, the moment the miscommunication happened.
Exactly. The Spanish tercios were destroyed. Their legacy ended in an absolute bloodbath, partly because of a misunderstanding over surrender. A handful of traumatized, deafened musketeers didn't get the memo. They saw an enemy riding toward them. They fired a shot out of fear or loyalty, and they doomed thousands of their own men.
It's incredibly tragic.
It raises a haunting question about history itself. We spend so much time analyzing grand strategy. We study the engineering of star forts, the math of linear formations, the brilliant minds of kings and generals. We build these massive logical narratives about why things happen.
Because we want history to make sense.
Right. But how many massive geopolitical shifts, the fall of vast empires or the sudden, unexpected rise of new global powers, weren't actually the result of some master plan or superior system? How many of the world-altering events that shape our lives today were, in reality, just the result of a single chaotic miscommunication in the heat of the moment?
It is a humbling thought. We like to believe that history is a chess match, but more often than not, it is determined by the fog of war, by the things we cannot control and the messages that never arrive in time.
A terrifying thought to leave you with as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the history behind the world you see today, and we'll catch you next time.